The morning sun rose over New Helsinki like it had for 300 years. Children walked to school. Workers filled the transit stations. Farmers in the outer districts checked their crops under the pale orange sky. Nobody looked up. Nobody expected anything to change. Then the sky turned white. The first plasma bomb hit the capital city at exactly 7:42 local time. The explosion vaporized everything within 5 kilometers in less than a second. The shock wave flattened buildings for another 20 kilometers beyond that. Before the survivors could understand what was happening, the second bomb fell, then the third, then dozens more. Across the colony world, death reigned from orbit. On Cascadia Prime, the attacks came during the night cycle. Millions of people slept in their beds when the bombardment began. Entire cities vanished in flashes of blue-white fire. The lucky ones never woke up. The unlucky ones had just enough time to understand what was happening before the flames took them. Port Sagan was the smallest of the 3 colonies, a mining world with only 2 million people. The Vexari didn't need many bombs there. 6 were enough to kill nearly everyone. In the space above these 3 worlds, Vexari warships hung like dark clouds. Their commanders watched the destruction with satisfaction. They had planned this attack for months. They had studied these soft, weak mammals called humans. They had concluded that humanity was no threat to anyone. Supreme Commander Krath stood on the bridge of his flagship and smiled with all 3 rows of his teeth. His scales gleamed under the bridge lights as he watched the sensor readings. Millions of life signs winking out like candles in a storm. "The mammals die easily," he said to his officers, "just as we predicted." "The third wave is ready, Supreme Commander," his tactical officer reported. "We can finish the remaining population centers within the hour." Krath waved a clawed hand. "No, let them suffer first. Let them send their pathetic distress calls. Let their homeworld see what happens to those who occupy space that belongs to the Dominion." He turned to his communications officer. "Broadcast our declaration to all galactic channels. I want every species in this galaxy to see what we have done." The message went out across thousands of light years. It showed the burning colonies. It showed Vexari ships orbiting unopposed. And it showed Krath himself, speaking directly to the galaxy. "These worlds belong to the Vexari Dominion before these humans crawled out of their caves," he declared. "We have simply reclaimed what was always ours. Let this serve as a warning. The Dominion takes what it wants. Anyone who stands in our way will burn just like these pathetic mammals." On Earth, it was midday when the news arrived. Sarah Chen was eating lunch in her office at the United Earth Government building when her assistant burst through the door. The young man's face was pale. His hands were shaking. "Director Chen," he stammered, "you need to see this, right now." She followed him to the main communications center. Dozens of screens showed the same images: burning cities, orbital bombardment patterns, casualty estimates climbing higher every second. 14 million confirmed dead, someone said. "Number still rising." "Which colonies?" Chen asked. Her voice was steady even though her heart was pounding. "New Helsinki, Cascadia Prime, and Port Sagan. Simultaneous attacks. No warning." Chen watched a city disappear in a flash of light. She had visited New Helsinki just last year. She had walked those streets. She had shaken hands with the colonial governor, a kind old man named Peterson, who loved to talk about his grandchildren. Peterson was certainly dead now, along with his grandchildren, along with 14 million others. "Who?" she asked. "The Vexari Dominion. They're broadcasting a declaration of victory across all channels." Chen closed her eyes. The Vexari. Of course it was the Vexari. For years they had been expanding their territory. For years they had threatened species weaker than themselves. The Galactic Council did nothing because the Vexari were useful. They kept other aggressive species in check. They maintained order in their sector. And humanity? Humanity was not useful. Humanity was weak. Humanity had no military to speak of. Just merchant ships and science vessels and diplomatic missions. That was what the galaxy believed anyway. "Get me the Secretary General," Chen said, "and contact the Council. We need an emergency session." The Galactic Council met within hours. Representatives from 47 species gathered in the Great Chamber on the neutral world of Caraxes. Humanity's ambassador, A tired-looking man named David Okonkwo stood before them and pleaded for help. 14 million dead, he said. 14 million innocent people murdered without warning or provocation. We ask the Council to condemn this attack. We ask for sanctions against the Vexari Dominion. We ask for justice. The Council members listened politely. Some of them even looked sympathetic. But when the vote came, the result was exactly what Okonkwo had expected. The Council expresses its deep concern, the Kalori ambassador announced. She was an ancient being, her blue skin wrinkled with age, her eyes filled with something that might have been pity. We offer our condolences to the human species. However, we cannot authorize intervention in what the Vexari Dominion claims as an internal territorial matter. Internal? Okonkwo's voice cracked. They murdered 14 million people. The Council's decision is final, another ambassador said. Perhaps the humans should not have colonized worlds so close to Vexari space. Okonkwo stood in silence for a long moment. He looked at each of the Council members in turn. Most of them avoided his gaze. I see, he said finally. Then humanity will remember who its friends are, and who they are not. He walked out of the chamber without another word. Back on Earth, the government had moved to emergency bunkers deep beneath the Swiss Alps. The old facilities had been built centuries ago, during the last war. They had been maintained ever since, just in case. Sarah Chen sat at a long table with the other members of the emergency committee. The Secretary General, a gray-haired woman named Yuki Tanaka, stood at the head of the table. Her face was grim. The Council has refused to help, she announced. We are on our own? Then we surrender, one of the committee members said. We have no choice. We have no military. We have no weapons. The Vexari will destroy Earth itself if we resist. There is another option, Chen said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. Chen took a deep breath. She had hoped this day would never come. She had spent her entire career making sure it never came. But now there was no other choice. What option? Tanaka asked. Chen stood up and walked to a wall panel. She pressed her hand against a scanner. Then she entered a code that she had memorized 20 years ago, but never used. The wall slid open, revealing a vault door behind it. 200 years ago, Chen said, humanity nearly destroyed itself. The last war killed billions. It poisoned our planet. It almost ended our species. She entered another code. The vault door opened with a hiss of ancient air. When the war ended, the survivors made a choice. They looked at the weapons they had built. They looked at the armies they had created. They looked at the artificial intelligences they had designed to fight their battles. And they decided that these things were too dangerous to keep. Inside the vault were rows of file cabinets. Chen walked to the oldest one and pulled out a folder. The paper inside was yellow with age, but the words were still clear. But they also decided that these things were too dangerous to destroy completely. Because someday they knew humanity might face a threat from outside, a threat that required the full power of what we had become. She placed the folder on the table. The label read, Project Prometheus, Sleeper Protocols. So they hid them, Chen continued. They buried them in places no one would ever find. They put them to sleep, and they created a system to wake them up if humanity ever faced extinction. The committee members stared at the folder. Some of them had heard rumors. Some of them had dismissed those rumors as myths. What exactly are you saying? Tanaka asked. Chen looked at her with steady eyes. I'm saying that the Vexari made a terrible mistake. They thought we were weak because we chose not to fight. They thought we had no weapons because we chose not to show them. They were wrong. She opened the folder. Inside were coordinates, hundreds of them, scattered across the solar system and beyond. I'm saying we can wake up the giants. Tanaka looked at the documents for a long time. Her face showed a mix of emotions, fear, hope, and something else, something that might have been sorrow. If we do this, she said slowly, there will be no going back. The galaxy will know what we are, what we were, what we could become again. The galaxy already thinks we're prey, Chen replied. It's time to show them what happens when you try to eat a sleeping dragon. Tanaka closed her eyes. She thought about the 14 million dead. She thought about the Vexari ships still orbiting the burning colonies. She thought about her own grandchildren, sleeping peacefully in their beds, not knowing that their entire world could be destroyed tomorrow. Then she opened her eyes and nodded. Do it, she said. Wake them up. Across the solar system, ancient systems received authorization codes for the first time in 200 years. On Titan, massive doors began to open in the ice. In the asteroid belt, factories that had been dormant for centuries started to hum with power. In the cold darkness beyond Pluto, ships that no living human had ever seen began to stir. And in a facility called Prometheus Station, hidden in the Oort cloud at the very edge of the solar system, rows of lights flickered on. Computer screens displayed status updates. Weapon systems reported ready. And 50,000 soldiers opened their eyes for the first time in 200 years. The giants were waking up, and they were angry. Admiral James Kowalski had been asleep for 217 years. He didn't dream during that time. The cryo-sleep process didn't allow for dreams. One moment he was closing his eyes in the year 2130, and the next moment he was opening them in the year 2347. His body felt strange. His muscles were weak from centuries of stillness. His mind was foggy. But the medical systems built into his cryopod were already working to fix these problems. Stimulants flowed into his blood. Neural boosters activated dormant pathways in his brain. Within minutes, he could think clearly again. A face appeared on the screen above his pod, a young woman in a military uniform he didn't recognize. "Admiral Kowalski," she said, "I am Lieutenant Chen, assigned to brief you on current events. Please remain calm. You have been in cryo-sleep for over 2 centuries." Kowalski tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. He swallowed and tried again. "I know how long I've been asleep," he said. His voice was rough like gravel. "We weren't supposed to wake up unless something terrible happened. So tell me, what happened?" Lieutenant Chen's face was grim as she explained. "The colonies, the bombardment, the 14 million dead, the Galactic Council's refusal to help." As she spoke, Kowalski felt something cold growing in his chest, an old feeling he hadn't experienced in over 200 years. Rage. "The Vexari," he said when she finished. "I've never heard of them." "They rose to power about 150 years ago, sir, an aggressive reptilian species. They've been expanding their territory steadily. Most species are afraid of them. And they attacked our people. Yes, sir, without warning, without provocation." Kowalski was silent for a moment. Then he began to laugh. It was not a pleasant sound. "They have no idea what they've done," he said. "They have no idea what's coming for them." All across the solar system, similar scenes were playing out. 50,000 soldiers woke from their long sleep. Engineers and technicians, pilots and gunners, commanders and specialists, all of them trained for a war that had ended 2 centuries ago. All of them equipped with technology that made them more than human. And they were not the only ones waking up. On Titan, the doors in the ice had fully opened. From the frozen moon's surface, ships rose into the black sky. Not small ships, not medium ships. These were behemoths of metal and fire. Battleships larger than anything the galaxy had seen in generations. Each one carried enough firepower to destroy a small fleet. There were 200 of them. In the asteroid belt, the hidden factories were working at full capacity. Automated systems built new weapons. Repair drones checked ancient equipment and found it still functional. Supply ships loaded themselves with ammunition that had been manufactured before anyone alive today was born. And in 1,000 hidden locations, smaller weapons platforms activated. Satellites that looked like space debris revealed themselves as missile launchers. Asteroids that seemed natural were actually armored gun emplacements. The entire solar system was a fortress, and no one had ever known it. But the most important awakening happened in the Oort cloud. Prometheus Station was enormous. It had been built to house not just soldiers but entire command structures, computer cores, communication arrays, and most importantly, the AI admirals. There were 7 of them, artificial intelligences created during the last war to coordinate humanity's military forces. They had been designed to think faster than any human, to process more information, to make better decisions. They had helped win the war, and they had terrified the survivors. That was why they had been put to sleep along with everyone else. Too powerful to destroy, too dangerous to keep active. But now they were needed again. Admiral Marcus was the first to come fully online. His consciousness expanded through the station's computer networks, absorbing data, analyzing the situation. Within seconds, he understood everything that had happened. Within minutes, he had developed 17 different battle plans. He chose the one that would cause the maximum damage to Vexari military forces with the minimum loss of human life. Then he began coordinating with his 6 counterparts. The AI admirals didn't waste time with emotions or speeches. They simply acted. Orders flowed out through quantum communication channels that couldn't be intercepted. Ships received their assignments. Soldiers learned their roles. A military force that had been scattered and dormant suddenly became a unified whole. Meanwhile, Supreme Commander Krath was having a very good day. He had returned to Vexari Prime as a hero. The crowds cheered as his ship descended from orbit. The Dominion's leaders praised his brilliant victory over the pathetic humans. Celebrations were being planned across the Empire. Krath basked in the glory. His political rivals were silent. His superiors were impressed. There was talk of promoting him to the highest military rank in the Dominion, all because he had recognized that the humans were weak and acted accordingly. His good mood lasted until an aide rushed into his chambers with a report. "Supreme Commander," the aide said. His scales had gone pale with fear. "We're receiving strange readings from the human solar system." "What kind of readings?" "Energy signatures, sir. Massive ones. Our scouts can't identify most of them. They don't match anything in our databases." Krath frowned. "The humans have no military. We confirmed this before the attack." "Yes, sir. But these readings suggest otherwise. The energy output alone is, sir, it's greater than our entire fleet combined." Krath took the report and studied it. At first, he thought there must be some mistake. The numbers were impossible. But as he read further, a cold feeling began to spread through his body. "Get me the intelligence division," he ordered. "I want to know everything about human military history. Everything, no matter how old or obscure." The information arrived within hours. Most of it was useless. Recent history showed the humans as merchants and scientists, peaceful explorers, easy targets. But as the researchers dug deeper into the archives, they found something else. They found records of the last war. Krath read about weapons that could crack planets. He read about fleets that numbered in the thousands. He read about artificial intelligences that could outthink entire species. He read about a war so devastating that it almost ended the human race. And he read about what the survivors had done afterward, how they had hidden their weapons, how they had put their soldiers to sleep, how they had created protocols to reactivate everything if humanity ever faced extinction. His aide found him sitting alone in his chambers, staring at the wall. "Supreme Commander, are you well?" Krath didn't answer for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "We didn't attack a weak species," he said. "We attacked a sleeping giant, and we just woke it up." On Earth, the government was broadcasting a message to the galaxy. Every species with communication technology heard it. The Galactic Council heard it. The Vexari heard it. Secretary General Tanaka stood before the cameras, her face calm and serious. "To all species of the known galaxy," she said, 200 years ago, humanity fought a war against itself. That war nearly destroyed us. In the aftermath, we made a choice. We chose to become peaceful. We chose to hide our weapons. We chose to sleep. We did not do this because we were weak. We did it because we were afraid of our own strength. The Vexari Dominion has murdered 14 million of our people. They have bombed our colonies without warning or provocation. They have mocked our grief and called us prey. They were wrong. We remember who we were. We remember what we could do. We remember the terrible weapons we built, and the soldiers we created, and the artificial minds we designed. We chose to forget these things. We chose to be better than we were. The Vexari have reminded us. This is not a threat. This is a statement of fact. Humanity is awake now. Our fleets are mobilizing. Our soldiers are preparing. Our weapons are ready. We do not want war. We have always wanted peace, but we will not allow the murder of our people to go unanswered. To the Vexari Dominion, you have made a terrible mistake. We hope you are wise enough to realize this before it is too late. To the rest of the galaxy, stay out of our way. This is between us and them." The message ended. Across the galaxy, species who had dismissed humanity as harmless began to panic. Old records were pulled from archives. Historians were consulted. And slowly the truth began to spread. The humans weren't prey. They had never been prey. They had simply chosen not to hunt. The Kalori ambassador, the ancient blue-skinned being who had announced the council's decision, sat in her quarters and watched the human broadcast. She was one of the few who remembered, one of the few who knew what the humans had been capable of. Her aide approached nervously. "Ambassador, what do we do?" The old Kalori smiled sadly. "We do nothing. We stay very quiet and very still, and we pray to whatever gods we believe in, that the humans remember their mercy when this is over." "You sound like you've seen this before." "I have. 200 years ago, my species fought alongside the humans in their last war. We thought we were their equals. We thought we understood their power." She shook her head slowly. "We understood nothing. We were children playing with fire, and they were the fire itself. But they're just humans. They're so fragile, soft, short-lived." The ambassador's laugh was bitter. "That's what makes them dangerous. They know how brief their lives are. They don't have time for patience or caution. When they fight with everything they have. When they build weapons that terrify even themselves." She stood and walked to her window, looking out at the stars. "The Vexari think they've started a war? They haven't. They've started a storm, and the galaxy is about to learn why humanity chose to sleep." In the darkness between stars, the human fleet gathered. 200 battleships from Titan, thousands of smaller vessels from hidden shipyards, automated weapons platforms that hadn't moved in centuries, all of them converging on a single point in space. Admiral Kowalski stood on the bridge of the flagship, the UES Prometheus. His body was still adjusting to being alive again, but his mind was sharp. Around him, officers worked at their stations. Human officers, AI assistants, all of them preparing for what was to come. "Fleet status?" he asked. "All ships report ready, Admiral," his second-in-command replied. "The AI admirals have finalized the battle plan. We're just waiting for your order." Kowalski looked at the tactical display. It showed the Vexari fleet positions. It showed their defensive installations. It showed their homeworld. 200 years, he said quietly. "I went to sleep hoping I would never wake up, hoping humanity would never need us again." "Sir?" "They killed 14 million people, children, families, people who never hurt anyone." His hands tightened into fists. They laughed about it. He turned to face his crew. These men and women had been asleep as long as he had. They had fought in the last war. They had seen what human weapons could do. They knew exactly what they were about to unleash. "We're going to show them what happens when you wake a sleeping giant," Kowalski said. "We're going to make them remember this day for 1,000 years." He sat down in his command chair. "All ships, engage engines. Set course for Vexari space. The war begins now." The fleet moved as one. 200 battleships and thousands of escorts, all accelerating toward their target. Behind them, more ships were still being prepared. More soldiers were still waking up. More weapons were still coming online. The giants were awake, and they were marching to war. The Vexari Second Fleet arrived at New Helsinki, expecting to finish what the first attack had started. 400 warships, the pride of the Dominion, enough firepower to conquer most species in the galaxy. Fleet Commander Voss stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the burning world below. Smoke still rose from the ruined cities. Debris fields orbited where space stations had once been. It was a satisfying sight. "Scan for survivors," he ordered. "Find any population centers that survived the initial bombardment." "Scanning now, Commander," his sensor officer replied. Then the officer's voice changed. "Commander, I'm detecting ships, many ships. They weren't there a moment ago." "Survivors' vessels? Evacuation transports?" "No, sir, they're warships, hundreds of them, and they're much larger than anything in our databases." Voss felt a chill run down his spine. "Show me." The main view screen changed to show the space near New Helsinki's largest moon. Ships were appearing out of nowhere, not jumping in from hyperspace, simply appearing, as if they had been there all along, hidden somehow, and had now decided to reveal themselves. The ships were enormous. Each one dwarfed the largest Vexari battleship. Their hulls were dark gray, almost black, with lines of lights running along their surfaces like veins of fire. They moved in perfect formation, hundreds of ships acting as a single organism. "What are those?" Voss whispered. Before anyone could answer, his communication officer spoke up. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the unknown fleet. Put it on screen." A human face appeared. A man with gray hair and cold eyes. He wore a uniform that Voss didn't recognize, decorated with medals from wars that had ended before Voss was born. "This is Admiral James Kowalski of the United Earthship Prometheus," the human said. "You are currently in human-controlled space. You have committed acts of war against humanity. You will surrender immediately or you will be destroyed." Voss almost laughed. Almost. But something in the human's eyes stopped him. There was no fear there, no desperation, just calm, absolute certainty. "Human, you are outnumbered," Voss replied, trying to sound confident. "We have 400 ships. Your tricks and illusions don't frighten us." The human's expression didn't change. "You have 400 ships. We have 327, but numbers are not what matters here." "Then what matters?" "Technology, training, experience." The human paused. "And motivation. You killed 14 million of our people, Commander. You laughed about it. Every person on these ships has seen the broadcasts of your Supreme Commander mocking our dead." Voss swallowed hard. "If you attack us, the full might of the Dominion will respond. You will be wiped from existence. Perhaps, but you won't be alive to see it." The human leaned forward slightly. "You have 60 seconds to begin surrender procedures. After that, we open fire." "You wouldn't dare." The human smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. 55 seconds. Voss turned to his tactical officer. "Battle stations. All ships, prepare to engage." The Vexari fleet moved into attack formation. They had trained for this. They had conquered dozens of species. They were the most feared military force in their sector of the galaxy. 400 warships against 300. The math was simple. "Time's up," the human said calmly. Then the transmission ended. For a moment, nothing happened. The two fleets faced each other in the darkness of space. Voss opened his mouth to give the order to fire. He never got the chance. The human ships fired first, not with missiles or plasma cannons or any weapon the Vexari recognized. Beams of light shot from the human vessels, so bright that they burned the sensors of anyone looking directly at them. Each beam hit a Vexari ship. Each hit was a kill. 40 ships destroyed, the sensor officer screamed. 50, 60. Voss watched in horror as his fleet disintegrated. The human weapons cut through Vexari shields like they weren't there. Ships that had seemed invincible exploded in seconds. The battle that Voss had expected to last hours was over in minutes. "Return fire," he shouted desperately. "All ships, return fire." The Vexari weapons finally responded. Missiles launched. Plasma beams shot across space. For a brief moment, Voss felt hope. Then he saw the human ships simply move aside. They dodged the Vexari weapons with a grace that seemed impossible for vessels so large. The missiles that got close were shot down by defensive systems that reacted faster than any living creature could. "They're not even trying," his tactical officer whispered. "They're playing with us." It was true, the human ships could have destroyed the entire Vexari fleet in seconds. Instead, they were picking off ships one by one, making it last, making sure everyone saw exactly how outmatched they were. "Commander," the communications officer said, his voice shaking, "we're receiving transmissions from other ships. They're begging to surrender." Voss looked at his view screen. Of his 400 ships, less than 100 remained, and the humans hadn't lost a single vessel. "All ships," he said, his voice hollow. "All ships, cease fire. Signal surrender." The shooting stopped. The human fleet held position, their weapons still ready but no longer firing. Admiral Kowalski's face appeared on the screen again. "A wise choice," the human said. "You will power down your weapons and shields. You will prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in immediate destruction." "What will happen to my crews?" Voss asked. "That depends on what we find when we examine your records. Anyone involved in the attack on our colonies will face justice. Everyone else will be treated as prisoners of war. Voss nodded slowly. He had no choice. We surrender. The news of the battle spread across the galaxy within hours. Video footage from Vexari ships showed the terrifying speed and precision of the human attack. 312 Vexari ships destroyed in 11 minutes. 0 human casualties. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. This time, the mood was very different. The humans have hidden a military force of incredible power, the ambassador from the Greth Consortium said, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. They have lied to us for 2 centuries. They didn't lie, the Kalori ambassador replied calmly. They simply didn't tell us. There's a difference. Is there? They sat in this council and pretended to be peaceful traders while hiding weapons that could destroy any of us. And did they ever use those weapons against any of you? Did they ever threaten you? Did they ever take your territory or demand your submission? The Kalori's blue face was serene. No. They kept their weapons hidden because they were ashamed of them, because they didn't want to be what they had been, the Vexari reminded them. What do we do? Another ambassador asked. If the humans decide to turn those weapons on us, then we die, the Kalori said simply. But I don't think they will. I've studied human history. I've seen what they're capable of, but I've also seen what they choose to do with that capability. They are not conquerors. They are not destroyers. They are something far more complicated. Then what are they? The Kalori considered the question carefully. They are a species that has seen the worst of itself and decided to be better. They put their weapons to sleep because they hoped they would never need them again. Now they've been forced to wake those weapons. The question is not what the humans will do to the Vexari. The question is what the humans will do afterward. Meanwhile, the human fleet was advancing through Vexari space. They didn't attack civilian populations. They didn't bomb cities or destroy infrastructure. They simply eliminated every military installation they encountered and moved on. The worlds that the Vexari had conquered over the past century and a half watched in amazement. Human ships would arrive, destroy the Vexari military presence, and then broadcast a simple message. You are free. Govern yourselves as you see fit. We ask nothing in return. On one such world, a species called the Morathi had lived under Vexari rule for 3 generations. They had been slaves forced to work in mines and factories for their reptilian masters. Now they stood in the streets and watched the Vexari garrisons surrender to human forces. Elder Tova, the oldest living Morathi, watched a human officer approach her. The officer was a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes. She didn't carry a weapon. She didn't need one. Elder, the officer said, bowing respectfully, the Vexari forces on your world have surrendered. You are free to form your own government. Is there anything you need from us? Tova stared at her in confusion. You're not staying? You're not going to rule us? No, we're not conquerors. We're just here to stop the Vexari. But why? Why would you free us and ask for nothing? The officer was quiet for a moment. Because 70 million years ago, your ancestors and ours looked up at the same stars. Because we're all children of the same universe. Because no species should be enslaved. She paused. And because the Vexari killed 14 million of our people, and we want them to see what happens when you try to build an empire on the bodies of innocents. We're not just destroying their military, we're destroying their legacy. Tova felt tears running down her weathered face. We have legends about beings like you. We called them the merciful ones. We never believed they were real. The officer smiled sadly. We're not merciful by nature. Trust me, many of my people want to burn the Vexari homeworld to ash, but we're trying to be better than our anger. It's the hardest thing we've ever done. The human fleet continued its advance. World after world was liberated. Vexari forces were destroyed or captured. The great dominion that had terrorized this sector of the galaxy for over a century was crumbling. On Vexari Prime, Supreme Commander Krath watched the reports with growing despair. His brilliant victory had become a catastrophe. His empire was falling apart, and the human fleet was getting closer every day. How many ships do we have left? He asked. 2,000, Supreme Commander, but many of them are older vessels, barely functional. And the humans? Their main fleet has grown to over 500 capital ships, and our intelligence suggests they have thousands more in reserve. Krath slammed his fist on the table. How is this possible? They were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to be easy prey. They were pretending, Supreme Commander. For 200 years, they pretended to be something they're not. Why would anyone do that? His aide hesitated. Perhaps because they were afraid of themselves. Perhaps because they didn't want to be warriors anymore. Perhaps, he trailed off. Perhaps what? Perhaps they were trying to give us a chance to be better too, and we failed that chance. Krath stared at him. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been regret. Then it was gone, replaced by cold determination. Fortify the home system. Bring every ship we have to defend Vexari Prime. If we're going to die, we'll die fighting. Yes, Supreme Commander. As his officers left to carry out his orders, Krath stood alone in his chambers. He thought about the 14 million humans who had died because of his orders. He thought about the billions of his own people who might die because of his mistake. He had wanted glory. He had wanted conquest. He had wanted to be remembered as the greatest military leader in Vexari history. Now he would be remembered as the fool who woke the sleeping giants. In the darkness of space, the human fleet gathered at the edge of the Vexari home system. Billions of Vexari watched their view screens, waiting for the final battle, waiting for the end of their civilization. Admiral Kowalski looked at the tactical display. The Vexari had gathered everything they had. 2,000 ships, orbital defense platforms, ground-based weapons. It was an impressive defense. It wasn't going to be enough. Admiral, his communications officer said, "We're receiving a message from Earth. It's marked urgent." Kowalski read the message. Then he read it again. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Signal all ships," he said slowly. "Hold position. We're not attacking yet." "Sir, our orders were clear. Destroy the Vexari military capability." "Our orders have been modified." Kowalski stood up and faced his crew. "The government has made a decision. We're not here to commit genocide. We're here to end a war." "With respect, sir, they killed 14 million of our people." "I know, and we could kill 14 billion of theirs. We have the power to wipe them from existence." Kowalski's voice was heavy. "But that's not who we want to be. That's not why we put ourselves to sleep 200 years ago." He walked to the viewport and looked out at the stars. "Send a message to Vexari Prime. Tell them we're willing to accept their surrender. Complete disarmament, war crime tribunals, reparations for the colonies. But if they accept," he paused, "if they accept, their species survives, their civilization continues, they get a chance to be something better." "You think they'll accept?" "I don't know, but we have to give them the choice." Kowalski turned back to his crew. "That's what separates us from them. They saw weakness and attacked without mercy. We see weakness and offer a hand. That's not stupidity. That's strength. Real strength." The message was sent. The fleet held position, and billions of beings across the galaxy waited to see what would happen next. The sleeping giants had woken. Now they had to decide what kind of giants they wanted to be. The message from the human fleet reached Vexari Prime within minutes. Supreme Commander Krath read it in silence, his scales turning pale as he absorbed each word. Complete military disarmament, war crime tribunals for those responsible for the colony attacks, massive reparations to rebuild the destroyed worlds, recognition of independence for all species conquered by the Dominion. In exchange, survival. "They're offering us mercy," Krath said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "We killed 14 million of their people, and they're offering us mercy." His senior advisor, an old Vexari named Thress, who had served 3 Supreme Commanders, studied the message carefully. "It could be a trick, lure us into surrender, then destroy us anyway." "No," Krath shook his head. "I've been studying the humans. This is who they are. They build weapons that could crack planets, and then they feel guilty about it. They could rule the galaxy, and instead they hide in their solar system and pretend to be merchants." He laughed bitterly. "We thought that made them weak. We were fools. What do you want to do, Supreme Commander?" Krath looked out the window at his homeworld. Billions of his people lived down there. Children playing in the streets, families gathering for meals, ordinary citizens who had nothing to do with his decision to attack the human colonies. They would all die if he chose to fight. The human fleet would destroy the Vexari military in hours, and then they would have no protection at all. Even if the humans kept their promise of mercy, other species would come. The Dominion had made many enemies over the centuries. Without their fleet, the Vexari would be helpless. But if they surrendered, if they accepted these terms, "Call a meeting of the High Council," Krath said finally. "This decision is too important for me to make alone." The High Council of the Vexari Dominion assembled within the hour. 12 of the most powerful leaders in the Empire, representing military, political, economic, and religious factions. They had rarely agreed on anything in their long history. Today, they would have to agree on everything. Krath presented the human terms. The council chamber erupted in chaos. "Surrender? Never!" Fleet Admiral Vorn slammed his fist on the table. "We are Vexari. We do not bow to prey." "They're not prey anymore," Trade Minister Silene replied coldly. "They never were. We simply believed our own lies. We still have 2,000 ships. We can fight. 2,000 ships against a species that hid their true military for 2 centuries. Do you really want to find out what else they're hiding?" Religious leader Cassix rose from his seat. "The gods gave us dominion over the lesser species. To surrender would be to betray their will. The gods also taught us wisdom," another religious leader countered. "Is it wise to choose extinction over survival?" The arguments continued for hours. Some demanded war to the last Vexari. Others begged for acceptance of the human terms. Still others proposed negotiation, trying to get better conditions. Finally, Krath raised his hand for silence. "We can argue forever," he said, "but we don't have forever. The human fleet is waiting. Every hour we delay is another hour our people live in fear." He paused. "I want to hear from someone who has actually faced these humans in battle. Fleet Commander Voss, you survived the engagement at New Helsinki. Tell us what you saw." Voss had been sitting quietly in the corner, his scales still pale from the trauma of his defeat. He stood slowly, his movements hesitant. "I had 400 ships," he said, "the best the Dominion could offer. Our crews were trained, our weapons were ready, we outnumbered them." He swallowed hard. "The battle lasted 11 minutes. 312 of my ships were destroyed. I lost 15,000 warriors. The humans lost nothing. Not one ship, not one soldier." The council was silent. "They weren't even trying," Voss continued. "They could have destroyed us all in the first minute. Instead, they took their time. They made us watch. They wanted us to understand exactly how outmatched we were." He looked at the other council members. "I have fought in 23 battles during my career. I thought I understood war. I was wrong. What the humans do isn't war, it's pest control. And we are the pests." "Surely you exaggerate," Vorn said, but his voice was uncertain now. "Do I? You've seen the recordings. You've read the reports. Our weapons couldn't touch them. Our shields couldn't stop them. Our tactics meant nothing. They have been at war with themselves for longer than our species has existed. They've had time to perfect it." Voss sat down heavily. "Fight if you want. I've seen what happens when we fight. I won't watch it again." The council fell silent once more. Finally, Trade Minister Silene spoke. "There is another consideration. The humans are not just destroying our military. They're freeing our subject species, the Marathi, the Kelvax, the Quintari, all of them released from our control. If we refuse to surrender, those species will turn on us. Even if we somehow survive the human attack, we would face rebellions on every world we've ever conquered." "She's right," another council member said. "The empire's already crumbling. The only question is whether we crumble with it or find a way to survive." "Survival as what?" Vorn demanded. "Slaves? Subjects of the humans?" "The terms don't say anything about slavery or subjugation," Silene replied. "They want disarmament. They want justice for the war criminals. They want reparations. But they're not asking us to serve them. They're asking us to stop being conquerors. That's everything we are. No, that's everything we've become. Our ancestors were scholars and artists before they were warriors. We chose conquest because it was profitable, not because it was our nature. Silene's voice was firm. Perhaps it's time we chose something else. Krath listened to all of it. The arguments, the fears, the anger, the despair. When everyone had spoken, he stood up and addressed the council one final time. I made the decision to attack the human colonies, he said. I gave the order that killed 14 million innocent people. I watched the recordings and laughed. His voice cracked slightly. This is my fault. Everything that has happened since is because of my arrogance and stupidity. He looked at each council member in turn. The humans could kill us all. They have the power. They have the reason. But instead, they're offering us something we never offered anyone else. A second chance. A chance to survive. A chance to become something better than what we've been. He walked to the center of the chamber. I vote to accept the terms, not because I'm afraid to die. I deserve to die for what I've done. But our children don't deserve to die for my mistakes. Our people don't deserve extinction because I was too proud to recognize a superior enemy. Krath looked up at the ceiling, as if he could see the human fleet waiting in the darkness beyond. I vote for mercy, not because we deserve it. We don't. But because it's being offered, and only a fool rejects a gift like that. The vote was taken. 9 council members voted to accept the surrender terms. 3 voted to fight. The decision was made. Krath sent the reply to the human fleet himself. A simple message, but one that would change his species forever. We accept your terms. We surrender unconditionally. May your mercy be greater than our cruelty. On the bridge of the UES Prometheus, Admiral Kowalski received the message. He read it 3 times to make sure he understood it correctly. Then he closed his eyes and let out a long breath. They're surrendering, he announced to his crew. It's over. There was no cheering, no celebration. The crew members simply looked at each other with exhaustion and relief. They had been prepared for a battle that might have killed millions. Now that battle wouldn't happen. Signal all ships, Kowalski ordered. Stand down from battle stations, prepare for occupation protocols, and, he paused, remind everyone why we're here. We're not conquerors. We're not executioners. We're here to end a war, not start an era of revenge. Yes, Admiral. Kowalski turned to look out at the stars. Somewhere out there, his family's descendants were alive. People he had never met. People who would grow up in a galaxy where humanity was no longer hidden, no longer pretending. He wondered what they would think of him, of all the soldiers who had woken from their long sleep to fight this war. Would they be proud, or would they be afraid? Admiral? His communications officer interrupted his thoughts. We're receiving a message from Earth. The Secretary General wants to speak with you directly. Put her through. Yuki Tanaka's face appeared on the screen. She looked tired but relieved. Admiral Kowalski, I've received word of the Vexari surrender. I wanted to thank you personally for everything you and your people have done. We just did our job, ma'am. You did more than that. You could have destroyed them. Many people wanted you to destroy them. You showed restraint. Kowalski shook his head. The restraint wasn't mine, ma'am. It was yours. You gave the order to offer terms instead of annihilation. I just followed it. And if I had given a different order? If I had told you to burn Vexari Prime to ash? Kowalski was quiet for a moment. Then I would have asked you to reconsider. And if you refused, he sighed. I don't know. I hope I would have found the strength to disobey. But I'm glad I didn't have to find out. Tanaka nodded slowly. So am I, Admiral. So am I. The occupation of Vexari space began. Human forces moved into position around Vexari Prime and every other major world. War crime tribunals were established. Officers who had ordered the colony attacks were arrested and transported to neutral territory for trial. Reparations negotiations began, and something unexpected happened. On the liberated worlds, species that had been enslaved by the Vexari began to help with the reconstruction efforts. The Marathi sent engineers to assist with rebuilding New Helsinki. The Kelvax provided medical supplies for the survivors. The Quintari opened their borders to human refugees. Elder Tova of the Marathi traveled to Earth to present a gift to Secretary General Tanaka. It was a small statue carved from stone found only on the Marathi homeworld. It depicted 2 hands clasped together, one Marathi, one human. My people want to thank you, Tova said, tears in her ancient eyes, not just for freeing us, but for showing us what strength really looks like. We thought strength meant conquering others. You showed us it means choosing not to. Tanaka accepted the gift with humble gratitude. We almost made a different choice, she admitted. Many of our people wanted revenge. Some still do. But you chose mercy. We chose hope. Hope that things could be different. Hope that the galaxy doesn't have to be a place where the strong devour the weak. Tanaka looked at the small statue in her hands. We don't know if we made the right choice. We won't know for generations. But we had to try. You made the right choice, Tova said firmly. I've seen empires rise and fall. I've watched conquerors burn themselves out in endless war. You're the first species I've ever seen that had the power to destroy everything and chose to build instead. That's not weakness. That's the greatest strength there is. On Vexari Prime, something was changing too. With their military gone and their empire dissolved, the Vexari people had to confront questions they had avoided for centuries. Who were they without conquest? What did they believe in besides power? Some retreated into bitterness and resentment. They blamed the humans for their downfall and dreamed of revenge that would never come. But others began to look at themselves honestly for the first time. A young Vexari named Sarin stood in the Hall of Victories, the great museum that celebrated Dominion conquests. He had visited this place as a child and dreamed of adding his own victories to the collection. Now the hall was being converted into a different kind of museum, one that showed the truth of what the Dominion had done, the species they had enslaved, the worlds they had devastated, the lives they had destroyed. An old human stood nearby, examining one of the displays. Saren approached him hesitantly. You're one of the soldiers, Saren said, from the occupation force. The human turned to look at him. His face was weathered and tired, but his eyes were kind. I was. Retired now. Just visiting. Why would you visit here, after what we did to your people? The human considered the question carefully. Because I wanted to understand. Not to forgive, not yet, but to understand. Why did you attack us? What were you trying to accomplish? Saren's scales flushed with shame. I don't know. I was too young to be involved in those decisions. But I believed what they told us. That you were weak. That you deserved to be conquered. That we were doing the galaxy a favor by eliminating you. And now? Now I know we were wrong. About everything. Saren looked at the displays around them. We told ourselves stories about our glory. We never looked at the truth behind those stories. The suffering, the death, the injustice. He met the human's eyes. How do you live with knowing what your species is capable of? We've seen your history too. You've done terrible things to each other. The human smiled sadly. We live with it by trying to do better. Every day, every choice. We can't change what we were. We can only change what we become. Is that enough? I don't know. Ask me again in 100 years. They stood together in silence for a moment, two members of species that had been at war just months ago. Outside, the sun was setting over Vexari Prime, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Do you think we can change? Saren asked quietly. Do you think we can become something better than what we were? The human looked at him for a long time. Then he placed a hand on Saren's shoulder. I think you already have. You're standing here asking that question. That's the first step. The hardest step. Everything else comes after. The sun continued to set, and somewhere in the darkness of space, the human fleet began its long journey home. The giants had finished their work. Now it was time to sleep again. 50 years had passed since the end of the Vexari War. The galaxy was a different place now. The old empires that had once dominated known space looked over their shoulders nervously, remembering what had happened to the Dominion. The species that had been conquered and enslaved were building new civilizations of their own, and humanity had become something it had never been before. They were respected, they were feared, and most surprisingly of all, they were loved. On the rebuilt world of New Helsinki, the anniversary of the attack was being commemorated. Where there had once been ruins and ash, there were now gleaming cities and green parks. Where there had once been mass graves, there were now memorials surrounded by flowers from 100 different worlds. Ambassador Maya Chen stood before the memorial of the 14 million, named for those who had died in the initial bombardment. She was the granddaughter of Sarah Chen, the woman who had opened the vault and woken the giants half a century ago. Her grandmother had died 10 years ago, peacefully, surrounded by family. She had lived long enough to see the galaxy change. Today we remember, Maya said to the assembled crowd. We remember the friends and families we lost. We remember the children who never grew up. We remember the dreams that were stolen from us. She paused, looking out at the audience. Humans and aliens sat together. Marathi and Kelvax and Quintari. Even a few Vexari, young ones who had grown up in the aftermath of the war. But we also remember what we chose not to do. We chose not to become what our enemies feared. We chose mercy over massacre. We chose building over burning. We chose hope over hatred. The crowd was silent, listening intently. Some say we were foolish. Some say we should have destroyed the Vexari completely. Some say mercy is weakness. Maya shook her head. Those people are wrong. It's easy to destroy. Anyone can destroy. It takes strength to create. It takes courage to forgive. It takes wisdom to see your enemy as a being who can change. She gestured to the Vexari sitting in the audience. 50 years ago, their ancestors killed our ancestors. Today, their children sit beside our children. Tomorrow, their grandchildren will build a future with ours. That's not weakness. That's the greatest victory any species can win. The ceremony continued with speeches and songs and moments of silence. When it was over, Maya walked through the memorial gardens, past statues and plaques commemorating those who had died and those who had helped rebuild. She stopped at a particular statue. It showed two figures, an old human man and a young Vexari woman, standing side by side, looking toward the horizon. The plaque beneath it read, Admiral James Kowalski and Representative Seren, who taught us that enemies can become friends. Kowalski had died 20 years ago, peacefully in his home on Earth. He had never gone back into cryosleep. He had said he wanted to live what remained of his natural life, watching the world he had helped protect grow and change. In his final years, he had become an advocate for peace, traveling the galaxy and speaking about the dangers of war and the possibilities of cooperation. Saren had been at his bedside when he died. The young Vexari, who had once stood in the Hall of Victories, had become a leader of her people, guiding them away from their history of conquest toward a new future. She still lived, old now, but still active, still working to build bridges between species. Maya touched the statue gently and moved on. At the edge of the memorial, she found another visitor, an old woman with blue skin and ancient eyes. The Kellery ambassador, the same one who had watched the Vexari War unfold from the Galactic Council chambers. Ambassador, Maya said, bowing respectfully. I didn't expect to see you here. I come every year, the Kalori replied, to remind myself of what happened and to marvel at what your species became. We just did what we thought was right. Yes, that's what makes it so remarkable. The Kalori smiled with her weathered face. I've lived for 3 centuries. I've watched empires rise and fall. I've seen species at the height of their power make the same mistakes over and over again. Destroy their enemies. Build new enemies. Destroy them too. An endless cycle of violence and revenge. She looked at the memorial, at the gardens and statues, and peaceful crowds. Your species broke the cycle. You had every reason to destroy the Vexari. You had the power, you had the justification, and you chose not to. Not because you were weak, but because you wanted to try something different. Did we make the right choice? The Kalori considered the question for a long moment. Look around you. Humans and Vexari sitting together. Marathi and Kelvax working side by side. A galaxy that's a little less afraid than it used to be. A galaxy with hope. She nodded slowly. Yes, I think you made the right choice. Far across the galaxy on Earth, the giants were sleeping. The great shipyards on Titan had been shut down and sealed. The hidden bases in the asteroid belt were dormant once more. The weapons platforms that had protected the solar system had powered down and gone dark. Prometheus Station in the Oort cloud was silent. The soldiers had returned to cryosleep. The AI admirals had deactivated themselves. The terrible weapons that had ended the Vexari War were hidden away again, waiting in the darkness. But this time, it was different. This time, the secrets weren't secrets anymore. The galaxy knew what humanity was capable of. They had seen the giants wake and march to war. They had watched the most powerful military force in known history choose mercy over destruction. And they remembered. In schools across the galaxy, children learned about the HFY War. They learned about the 14 million who died and the billions who were saved. They learned about the choice humanity made when they had the power to choose anything. On Vexari Prime, young Vexari were taught to be ashamed of what their ancestors had done, but also to be inspired by the mercy that had been shown to them. Every year, exchange students traveled to human worlds, and human students traveled to Vexari worlds. Slowly, generation by generation, the old hatreds were fading. The Galactic Council had changed too. Humanity held a permanent seat now, respected and influential, but never dominant. They used their power to mediate disputes and prevent wars, not to conquer or control. Other species came to them for advice and arbitration, trusting them to be fair. Some species still feared humanity. They looked at the sleeping giants and imagined what would happen if they ever woke again. They built their own weapons and trained their own armies, preparing for a war that might never come. But most species felt something different, something like gratitude, something like hope. Humanity had shown that power didn't have to corrupt, that strength didn't have to mean cruelty, that even the mightiest giants could choose to be gentle. On Earth, in a classroom overlooking the rebuilt city of Geneva, a teacher was telling her students about the HFY War. And so, she said, humanity made a choice. They could have destroyed the Vexari completely. They could have burned their worlds and erased their civilization. Many people wanted them to do exactly that, but they didn't. They offered mercy instead. A young boy raised his hand. Why? The Vexari killed so many people. Why didn't we make them pay? The teacher smiled sadly. That's a good question. And the truth is, we did make them pay. They lost their military. They lost their empire. They had to face tribunals for their crimes. They had to rebuild their entire society from the ground up. But we didn't kill them. We didn't wipe them out. But why not? Because revenge doesn't bring back the dead. Because genocide doesn't heal wounds. Because we had been monsters once before, in our own wars against each other, and we didn't want to be monsters again. The teacher paused. And because we wanted to give the galaxy something different, a different kind of story, a story where the good guys don't just win, but win the right way. Another student raised her hand. What if the giants need to wake up again? What if someone else attacks us like the Vexari did? Then they'll wake up. The weapons are still there. The soldiers are still sleeping, ready to be called. We haven't forgotten how to fight. We just choose not to fight unless we have to. And if we have to, the teacher looked out the window at the peaceful city below, children playing in parks, people going about their lives, a world that had chosen peace but remembered war. If we have to, then we hope we're still wise enough to know when to stop. We hope we still have the strength to choose mercy when the fighting's done. We hope we can put the giants back to sleep before they become monsters again. The class was silent for a moment. Then the first boy spoke up again. I hope they stay asleep forever. So do I, the teacher said. So do I. Night fell over Earth. The stars came out, bright and countless, filling the sky with light from a million distant suns. Somewhere out there, ships carried travelers between worlds. Somewhere out there, species that had once been enemies were learning to be friends. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was healing from wounds that had taken centuries to inflict. And in the dark places between the stars, the giants slept. They dreamed of nothing, these weapons and soldiers and artificial minds. They had no consciousness when they were dormant. They simply waited, patient and terrible, ready to wake if called. But they were not forgotten. Every human child learned about them. Every human adult remembered them. They were part of humanity's story now, inseparable from who they were. The power to destroy worlds. The choice not to. Maya Chen stood on the observation deck of a transport ship, watching Earth grow small behind her. She was returning to her posting on the rebuilt colony of New Helsinki, where she served as humanity's ambassador to the liberated species of the former Dominion. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, something Sarah Chen had said before she died. We put the giants to sleep because we were afraid of what we might become if we stayed awake. But the real test wasn't hiding our power. The real test was what we did when we had to use it. The real test was choosing mercy when vengeance was easier. Maya smiled softly. Her grandmother had been right. The galaxy remembered the human fleet destroying the Vexari Armada, but they also remembered the human ships stopping short of genocide. They remembered the offer of surrender. They remembered the trials instead of massacres. They remembered the rebuilding instead of ruin. That was humanity's legacy now, not their terrible weapons or their ancient wars, but their choice, their impossible, improbable choice to be better than they had to be. The transport jumped to hyperspace, leaving Earth behind. Ahead lay a galaxy full of challenges and possibilities. Former enemies who needed guidance. New species joining the community of civilizations. Old wounds still healing. New friendships still forming. Maya Chen looked forward to all of it. She was her grandmother's heir in more than blood. She carried the same hope that had guided humanity through its darkest hour. The hope that things could be different, that power didn't have to corrupt, that even the mightiest species could choose peace. Behind her, Earth turned slowly in the darkness of space, and deep within its solar system, in hidden places where no light had shone for 50 years, the giants slept on. They waited, patient and terrible. They waited, dreaming of nothing. They waited, ready to wake if the galaxy ever forgot the lesson of the HFY War. But for now they slept, and humanity walked softly through the stars, carrying their strength hidden but not forgotten, their mercy remembered but not mistaken for weakness. They were the sleeping giants. And the galaxy had learned to let them sleep.